Hello and welcome to another edition of the Keep Right On podcast, brought to you by us here at Birmingham Live. I'm Brian Dick and I'm joined today by Reach colleague and well-known blues fan, Shane Ireland. How are you doing, Shane?
Good, thanks, Brian. I wouldn't say I'm particularly well-known, but that's very kind of you.
You're well-known in our office because...
Oh, yeah.
50%
of people in the office know me, so I'll take that.
Exactly. You do go, just to set the table about your blues credentials, you go home and away, don't you, Shane? And have done for many years. Yeah. So Shane is speaking from a position of strength and adversity in many ways. I'll stop prattling. Obviously, we're producing a special edition of the Keep Right On podcast today, following the appointment of Gary Rowett as interim manager, and also breaking news, the return of Paul Robinson and Dave Carolan to take part, I assume, on an interim basis with Gary Rowett for the final 8 games of the season. We'll come to that in a bit. We'll obviously talk a lot about Rowett's arrival and the ramifications and the task that's before him in these remaining 8 games. I just want to start though, Shane. We're used to very unusual seasons, bizarre seasons with Birmingham City. How's this one been for you, given it probably started with you as optimistic about any Blues season as you've ever been?
Yeah, very much so, actually. I was just thinking, just as you were kind of chatting about Rowett coming back then, how surreal it all feels. And for Rowett to be back, it genuinely does feel surreal, doesn't it? That he's kind of the one that so many years ago that, you know, this comparison was made so much over the kind of Rooney appointment and Eustace being sacked. How much he got compared with the Rowett situation. And now, you know, we're kind of 6 months down the line and Rowett's back at Blues in a bid to keep us up. Looking back to the start of the season, yes, you're totally right. I was filled with optimism, and especially the way they started the season. There was a real buzz about the place, wasn't there? We had this brilliant takeover that finally happened. And Eustace looked like he was, you know, really making inroads on the pitch into kind of a clear plan, and Blues were climbing the table. What happened, and Rooney came in, and, you know, Blues obviously shot back down the table, and then kind of boosted again when Mowbray comes in. Then we have the awful news that he has to step away because of his health. And now kind of Blues, obviously we'll get onto the Rowett appointment, but I feel that Blues probably had no option but to roll the dice now with 8 games to go. What was happening wasn't working as much as, you know, Phoenix was trying his best. That's not a position he's used to, and the players are clearly low on confidence. And they've rolled the dice, and here we are. There's 8 games to go, and it's we're back in the kind of relegation dogfight with Blues having it all to play for, and looking to hopefully an exciting end to the season where we kind of get over the line.
Yeah, it is the absolute definition of irony, isn't it? This that Rowett would be sacked with Blues well placed and replaced by Gianfranco Zola, which then precipitated a downward spiral, and then Rowett is brought back in as the man to save the team from another relegation battle. It really is the textbook definition of irony. But yeah, speaking of the Rowett's appointment, I have to say, I recorded a podcast on Monday with Ryan Deeney and Joe Chapman, and I think I was largely just about against the idea of bringing in an interim on the basis that the players have had enough messages already, and the hope that Mowbray would be back sooner rather than later. I guess I'm not trying to make excuses now, but I guess what the difficulty with that is we've only ever had a part of the story. We've never had the whole picture in terms of the most important aspect of this season is that Tony Mowbray is healthy and well. And what we won't do on this is we won't speculate about what Rowett's appointment means or indicates about Tony Mowbray's health. You know, the standpoint that we've got that we've maintained is that is first and foremost the most important thing, and it's private medical information, and we're just going to leave it at that. So that being said, that doesn't also preclude me from being happy about Gary Rowett turning up. I think I kind of, you suggested that something needed doing, didn't you, Shane? And now it's happened. I'm probably on board with that as well. I'm blown with the wind here. But was it always your belief that somebody needed to come in and arrest this, because Venus just didn't look like it was a position he wanted to be in as much as anything?
To be honest, no. I think I'd probably had the same view as you, that another change brings about more upheaval, doesn't it? And more new ideas to players who, some of them must be thinking, players who've been there for a number of years, obviously Djukovic, for example, imagine the amount of team meetings he's gone in where it's like, here's your introduction to your new manager. He must be like, how many times can I actually do this at one football club? And I think that's what put me off bringing in an interim manager, just because with the way it is and the way it's set up, that it's going to probably be a more pragmatic type of manager. And Blues players have been told to play one way at the start of the season, another way under Rooney, another way under Mowbray, and assumingly a slightly different way under Rowett. And that's what would put me off. But I think in the last 3 games, I'd say, in the last game, I don't think Blues played particularly badly, but it was just a game where you come away thinking, I can't see Blues scoring goals and getting enough points in this way of playing under Venus for us to have kind of safety in our own hands, for us to get ourselves up the table and away from it. So I'd say in the last fortnight or 3 weeks, my views have changed, and I think something had to give. They've rolled the dice now, and kind of for all that's happened this season in terms of Rooney coming in, what you can say about Knighthead is they haven't been slow to change things when they think something needs changing. And I do think something needed changing. And under it's a very kind of specific set of circumstances, isn't it? Blues aren't saying, here's, we're going to sign you, and if you're doing well, you're here for the next 5 years or something. It's kind of, here's your 8 games. And, it's a situation where they're looking at how many managers are available, who will want this. Obviously, Gary Rowett would happily come back to Blues and has done. And I think they've probably made the right decision in the end. I certainly think Blues now have a better chance of survival with Gary Rowett as the interim manager than they would have if they'd have carried on with how it was set up.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that. And obviously Blues would have been privy to more information about where Mowbray was in his recovery. So they have got, as I say, more information to make that decision. I don't think it was a choice that we need to get anyone in. I think, yes, the circumstances of Mowbray are very, very specific. I think the fact that Rowett is out of a job and knows the club, I think that also makes it a relatively more straightforward appointment, rather than just starting a search at the beginning of an international period and saying, right, who can we bring in to be the interim. It seems odd to describe it as this after this season, but the circumstances fell for Blues, and the sort of the ducks are all in a row, weren't they, for someone like Rowett to come in and yeah, hopefully repeat the incredible makeover that he produced when he first came to the club back in 2014. Do you remember were you at the 8-0, Shane, the game before the Bournemouth game before Rowett was appointed? You were.
I was, but I will admit I left at half time to spare myself what appeared to be a very obvious continuation of the onslaught in that first half. So I remember leaving the ground. Yeah, I remember leaving the ground. Just after half time, I think I left. And yeah, it seemed genuinely like rock bottom. And you get fans of other clubs say that, and it's like, no, that really was rock bottom. Like, as things go, that was so bad. And then the difference in the next game to going to Wolves away was genuinely incredible, stark. Like, I think Wolves were top of the league, weren't they, at the time?
Yeah. And
to turn around the players in that short amount of time, who were absolutely on the floor and had no belief, was brilliant. And it feels like it's not quite as stark as that, but something similar needs to happen again. I think just getting belief in the players seems so important, building up their confidence, bringing a bit of leadership to the group. Obviously, we're going to go on to things that Rowett needs to do in a bit more detail, but they seem like really good starting points, don't they?
Yeah, and you anticipated my question there. I was setting you up for, did you go to Bournemouth, and what how was it? Did you go to Wolves, and how was it? And yeah, absolutely. Conceding 8 to Bournemouth and then going and getting a 0-0 away at the league leaders, a clean sheet. That is, for me, that is this job in a nutshell. As you say, we'll come on to that in a little bit. Just want to look at the statement. Was there anything that stuck out in the club's statement for you, Shane? There was something for me. Both Tom Wagner and Gary Cook mentioned leadership. Tom Wagner said Gary's an experienced leader and has have full support. Gary Cook said a strong leader is needed to guide the players. That's what it's all been about, isn't it? It's just feels like there's been a lack of leadership, certainly on the pitch. And I don't want to diminish Venus or get stuck into Venus particularly, but it's all looked a bit shruggy and shouldery, hasn't it? On the sideline, and it doesn't feel like that there's been that sort of big personality on the sideline to bring that leadership as well. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I would agree, Brian. I mean, as you say, we don't want to get too stuck into Venus because he was handed these kind of strange circumstances in a, there's a reason. I'm not saying he wouldn't make a good manager, but there's a reason he's been an assistant for 20 years, for example. And he obviously did his best. But I think, to be honest, on leadership, I thought it kind of felt like a similar issue when Rooney was the manager as well. There was so little on-pitch leadership where, kind of certain things in the game would go against Blues and it would just drop and there would be nobody to bring them back up. And as you said in the statement, it was a very pointed thing, wasn't it? Leadership. Both of the people talking in that talked about leadership. And I think, Blues need that so badly from the touchline. And that feeds into leadership on the pitch, doesn't it? If you're getting clear messages from the manager in training before a game, on the touchline at half time, that's being fed straight into the players who can then, pass it on to teammates who need a hand over the shoulder or something like that. It's really been lacking, actually, and I think it's been lacking most in games where Blues have played well. For example, in the last match, but they just haven't had something to take them over the line. There's so many games this season where if Blues had just scored that goal or that error would have been prevented, where we wouldn't be in this position. And it's really felt like leadership is lacking in those situations where you just want players to have a bit more belief, that a senior voice to stand up and say, we can do this, lads. We're good enough to do this. And I think that really has been lacking.
Yeah, I noticed in the home match against Borough, I mean, that was obviously terrible. It was such a bad first half. And I thought when Duke came on, obviously they didn't transform Blues into Brazil. But suddenly there was a focal point. There was a personality on the pitch. And it almost looked to me like the players felt a little bit more accountable with someone like Lucas on the pitch. John Ruddy's tried to do that, but it's difficult to influence a game from goal, I think, isn't it? To bring that force of personality up to the halfway line when a potential counter-attack's broken down or something like that. Now there will be Rowett and Paul Robinson, presumably, in the technical area, barking out orders, issuing instructions, applauding, dishing out a few rollickings here and there where they're needed, or just making the odd tactical tweak. It just feels like there's going to be more personality associated around the first team squad now. The other thing that I thought was interesting was they made reference to Tony Mowbray being involved in this process, which I think is absolutely vital, isn't it? Yeah,
it is. It really is. We know Mowbray is away from the club at the moment, but we're absolutely not doubting that his mind is, he's still focused on Blues, and obviously he's been watching Blues closely and how they've been playing, and having Mowbray's input in this is absolutely vital. I think that's a massive tick in the box for me, and should be a massive tick in the box for Rowett and his staff coming in. That they've got the full support of the manager, and he's been so closely involved in the decision. That was great to see. Yeah, indeed. I think of all the conversations I would love to have heard this season, the one between Mowbray and Rowett would assuming they've spoken, that'd be a really interesting one. Listen, Gary Rowett can
I'm sure will be very respectful. I think we're expecting an interview with Blues TV at some point over the next few days. I'm sure he'll say all the right things, and he'll manage what is potentially a difficult situation with good diplomacy. Against a backdrop, where there's already some stories out there speculating about what might happen in the summer, which for me is in slightly bad taste at this stage. We talked about Gary Rowett's inbox. It's going to be pretty full, and we've made reference to the defensive situation. Is that where it starts, Shane? Is that number one on the agenda, or the biggest thing on his to-do pile?
Yeah, I think in terms of kind of tactics and formation-wise, I think it is. I think the absolute number one thing is, we've already been over it, is just getting confidence in the players. These players aren't bad players. These players are players who have looked brilliant playing under Tony Mowbray, and players who've looked brilliant playing under John Eustace, and in certain occasions look brilliant under Wayne Rooney. There are some really good footballers in the team, and they need somebody to remind them of that. And they're in this position for reasons they're in this position. Everything's happened. It doesn't really matter what's happened. They've got 8 games now to keep themselves in the league, and what's really frustrating about this is the way the season's panned out, and the way we kind of had all that brilliant stuff in the summer, the takeover, and new players being brought in, and what you would say is a better squad than previous squads that have faced relegations, that we've ended up in this situation again. But that is what it is. I think getting belief in the players, and then I'm sure we're going to speak about it now. Birmingham's defensive record as a team who have previously kind of done well in this regard, even when they've been in these relegation battles, is really bad this season. And at the moment, they've got the trouble of not scoring goals either, which adds kind of another level of complexity to needing to keep the goals out. The clean sheet record isn't great, is it? And Rowett also has to look at Blues getting a bit more, a bit better in front of goal as well. Where do you think he starts, Brian?
Yeah, I think inevitably you have to look at the defensive situation. Listen, defence and attack is a balance. It's two sides of the same coin, isn't it? It's how many players you commit forward, which then leaves you more vulnerable at the back. It's how much you play at the back and try and retain possession, set against how few risks you take and lump it forward and potentially lose possession. So it's all interlocking. I think the key issue is Blues have kept only 7 clean sheets this season. It's certainly one of the lowest in the Championship. They have to rectify that, and yes, that will potentially mean taking fewer risks and therefore maybe creating fewer opportunities, which might sound absolutely horrendous given the fact that they haven't scored a goal for 3 matches. But I think Saturday was a case in point where if they're not taking the chance that Emmanuel Ivu took, they probably draw that game 0-0, don't they? And they take a point, and stretch. They keep that gap on Huddersfield. So I do think it will be about staunching the flow at the back, and there will probably have to be a payoff in terms of the number of players they're putting forward. That in itself, I think, can give players confidence. Though I think if players feel safe and solid in their structure, then you get a nil against the opposition's name, you get that clean sheet, then you don't actually have to do a tremendous amount to win the game. I'd be looking at the nil, keeping the opposition to nil, and then hopefully rolling things out as that stability returns. And key to that, I think, is playing centre backs in central defensive positions. Dion Sanderson, I know he's had a really rough season, his first season as captain, and we spoke with Ryan Deeney the other day about Dion could potentially have learned to be a captain in a stable environment. It's a much more different challenge in the sort of the environment and the climate that he's been faced with since then. So Yeah, I think I would like to see Sanderson come back into the side. I wonder if Rowett sees a centre back in Bielik in the way that Tony Mowbray has. Mark Roberts' fitness will be interesting. I think we could see a little bit of Mark Roberts over the coming weeks as well if he's fit. And then it's Buchanan. Buchanan, I think, is actually playing quite well as a centre back, but for me, he's a left back. We've got to get away from the situation where there are too many square pegs in round holes, and that means Buchanan at left back, Sanderson at centre back, and JJ somewhere more central for me. So yeah, a little bit of clarity. I do feel like Blues and Venus have just sort of gone down a few dead ends in the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, they have, haven't they? Team selection has been pretty interesting, hasn't it? I don't think the unsettled side has helped Blues at any point in the season, but it certainly doesn't help when you're in the situation that they're in, kind of chopping and changing. I know it's all with the view of trying to find something that works, but I think Sanderson is absolutely nailed on to come back in under Rowett. And I agree with you. I think Mark Roberts might have a part to play. Going back to kind of Rowett's best pairing at Blues, which you'd probably say back in the day was Morrison and Shotton. They were absolutely nailed on the team sheet, weren't they? And yeah. I think centre back, bit of a cliche, but centre back is such an important position where you want a bit of clarity and you want to know who your teammate is and you want to know whether that player is likely to be. I mean, we saw that from the throw-in at the weekend, didn't we? Kind of, I think in a more settled team, that throw-in doesn't happen, or Aru passes it to a player he knows is going to be in this position. And I think with players playing with each other who haven't done so all season a lot, those kind of things happen. But yeah, I think he'll go back to probably the as you said, square pegs and round holes theory will go out the window, and it'll be Sanderson and it'll be Roberts, I think, and Bielik. Yeah, I don't see Bielik playing as a centre back under Gary Rowett.
No, it doesn't feel like a natural fit, does it? Yeah, the other issue I'd throw into the equation would be set pieces. Blues have scored 7, which is the 5th fewest in the league this season. They're obviously, we've seen all season there's a vulnerability at set pieces, especially when players punch the ball into the net. They find that particularly difficult to deal with, haven't they? The set piece issue is a big one for me. Rowett's Millwall last season scored 24 set piece goals, and that was the most in the championship. Now, yes, they had Jake Cooper and they had and big centre backs to throw themselves at the ball, and Blues don't necessarily have that. But it's more than just about size. It's about desire to win first contacts and things like that. And I think Blues have certainly got to be better. They've definitely got to be better at that in their own box, and I'd like to see an improvement in that in the opposition box as well. We've kind of hinted at this about which players might come back in. Inevitably, as under any manager, they have their favourites, and some get sidetracked or move to the fringes. We both think Dion Sanderson will potentially be brought back into the side, or he's not really been on the fringes. He's been banned and then on the bench for one game. Do you think there's anybody, fitness permitting, let's say that when they do get fit, and I don't think many people have been ruled out for the season yet, I think there's anybody that could be a bit of a bolter, or Rowett could bring back into the team from the fringes?
Yeah, so somebody who's been well and truly on the fringes, on the sidelines, is Oliver Burke. Interestingly, people probably realise that Rowett and Burke aren't strangers, and Burke played under Rowett at Millwall and played actually quite a lot of games. Certainly more games than he's going to probably end up playing for Blues. Well, we don't know that. As we're talking about this, he might come back in. So I think that's something to look at. I think Burke could be one that Rowett might look at bringing in. I think his work rate is pretty high, isn't it? Yeah. And he's somebody who could probably fill a few positions in a Rowett team. So Oliver Burke might be one to look at. Dembele's situation is interesting because at times he's looked like Blues' best player, and at times he's looked like, some of the goals that the Blues conceded, he's been so out of position defensively where he hasn't got back that it's kind of been. I feel like at times it's been all or nothing with Dembele, and I'm not sure how Rowett will feel about him, and something that his kind of defensive work rate is obviously an issue for other managers. But yeah, you'd probably throw Dembele's name into there, wouldn't you? Who's clearly on his day, a very, very talented winger.
Yeah, I would. I mean, I just haven't seen enough of Burke with the ball. Maybe Rowett can get a better tune out of him than Eustace and Rooney. And did he even play under Mowbray? He might have had one game potentially.
Yeah, I think so. Just one.
Yeah. I just don't see a clarity when he's in attacking positions. I don't see a clarity of what he's trying to achieve. As regards basic athleticism and physical power and pace, then yeah, potentially he could come in and do something for Blues. But it's almost like I feel like he's going to need to be given us a script as to what to do in each position, that sort of thing. So maybe onto the bench. I struggle to see, given what we've seen so far this season, I do struggle to see him being sort of airdropped into the 11, sort of brought that far back out from the cold. I think the one I'm curious about will be Scott Hogan. No, Rowett didn't have Hogan in his time at Blues. Hogan joined, I think, when Karanka or Pep Clotet actually had first use of Hogan, didn't he? Then Karanka had him on a full-time basis. If Juki's out, and I've talked quite a lot about Stansfield not looking that comfortable playing right up against a defence, then I do wonder if there is an opportunity for a reinvigorated again Scott Hogan to come back in and make an impact. If he can score 3 or 4 more goals or 5 goals between now and the end of the season, that could be absolutely key, could be critical. And I wouldn't be against Hogan and Stansfield but potentially playing up top together either. Even in a sounding like an absolute footballing caveman here in a 4-4-2, or potentially with Stansfield on the side in a 4-3-3 or something like that. But I just wonder if Hogan's ability to play up against the defence and lead the line is, in the absence of Djukovic, might be something that Rowett looks at.
I think Hogan will definitely get a chance. Would definitely get a fair chance under Rowett. And as we kind of hinted at there, we don't know how much of a role Djukovic is going to end up playing in the next kind of 6 weeks or so. I think Hogan will definitely get a good chance. And I agree in terms of when Blues are pressing up high and with the ball. I agree. I don't think Stansfield was totally comfortable playing there. I don't think it's where he would want to play if he had to choose. I can see Hogan. Hogan will definitely have a decent part to play. I'm pretty certain of it, to be honest. Yeah,
lots of teams defend in a 4-4-2, don't they? And you could see Stansfield and Hogan being quite effective as the two front men, sort of closing down the opposition. So, yeah, I think that will be explored. The other one, I don't know what Rowett feels about Gary Gardner or Sunjic, or how much, not that Sunjic is out in the cold, but how much physical edge he wants in his midfield. That'll be something else that I think he'll look at. Which brings us on to our final part of this podcast. It was a question unashamedly stolen from Paul Delves on Twitter. I have contacted Paul and told him we're nicking his question, but I was quite engaged by this. Paul posted on Twitter, if you could have one player from Rowett's first spell in form and fully fit in their team, who are you picking? You can kick us off on that one, Shane.
Okay, that's a great question, isn't it? Yeah, I like that. I would say immediately 2 players spring to mind at opposite ends of the pitch. One would be Clayton Donaldson, and the other one would be Michael Morrison. Donaldson, because we know how well he fit that Rowett system, and it seemed like in terms of the championship at the time, it seemed like he was the perfect player for the Rowett system, and he thrived in it. And Blues don't have that similar kind of striker at the moment, and I think he really would be a real focal point up front. And yeah, I'm more I think about this, I'm probably edging with Donaldson. And the other one would be Michael Morrison. We've already touched on the leadership and belief in players. I think he would be key to that at centre back. He was a good player. Morrison or Donaldson. This is tough. Each time I'm talking about one of them, I want to choose that one. I'm going to say I'm just going to I'm going to go for the attacking edge, and I'm going to say Clayton Donaldson.
Huge fan of Clayton Donaldson, to be fair. Real big fan. He did everything that Rowett wanted from that position, didn't he? He could play up against the defence. He could run the channels. He'd win balls in the air. He'd get his fair share of goals. He was absolutely perfect suit for that. I think I've got to go with the defence. Looking at I've said I think that is the big issue that Rowett will look at. Michael Morrison was obviously, he was the poster boy for the Rowett makeover in those first few months, wasn't he? When he came in from Charlton on a short-term basis, I think he played against Wolves in his first game. On the back of 2 training sessions or something like that, and then a month later, Blues actually bought him from Charlton for a bag of balls and some peanuts. So I do like Morrison. I think the centre back I'd go for would be Ryan Shotton. I think physically impressive, really athletic. Would put his body on the line, and I think Shotton had I think there was a Premier League player in Shotton when he was on his game, and yeah, I just do think that's the area of the team that needs shoring at the most. Just to add that I'm picking Ryan Shotton, even though he once took the tape off his socks, balled it up, and threw it at me in a pre-season friendly at Wolves. I obviously upset him in some way, but yeah, Ryan Shotton for me. It's the centre back, and got to go forward. Got to go forward with a centre back. I suppose the obvious answer is Damari Gray, isn't it? Really, but that's not an area of the team that Blues are kind of. They don't need a flying wide player, do they?
I agree. I agree. And yeah, in terms of most talent, I'd definitely go for Damari Gray. But yeah, I think at the moment, as you say, it's pretty clear, isn't it? They need to score more goals, but they probably more importantly need to keep out more goals.
Yeah, indeed. All of which brings us to the close. Shane's mentioned Michael Morrison in his assessment. I just want to draw people's attention to the fact that I spoke to Michael Morrison on Monday, early on Monday morning, before any of this Gary Rowett news was even starting to bubble up. So we've got a really nice half an hour interview with Michael Morrison for this weekend. I should add that it was recorded pre Rowett, but I think 99% of the stuff we talk about will be relevant and interesting. So look out for that on your usual podcast outlets and on YouTube. We'll be bringing you an exclusive podcast with Michael Morrison, which brings us to a close here. Shane, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much for having me on. Been a pleasure.
Yeah, hopefully not the last time. And thank you everybody for bearing with us, listening to another Keep Right On. We'll be, as I say, back with you on Sunday. Then Alex Dickham will be back next week, and we'll be looking ahead to the Easter fixtures. So thanks a lot again, and keep right on.